Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside the FLX. I'm Josh Durso, and as always, we are coming to you from the FingerLakes1.com studio in downtown Seneca Falls. We have a very exciting show today as we welcome Michael Warren Thomas, founder of Savor Life, to the studio. Michael, thanks a lot for stopping by.
I appreciate the opportunity. Beautiful day.
Yeah, tell me about it. It's October, believe it or not. So we have a lot to talk about. But first off, people might recognize your voice. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, how you came to be, and why you settled in the Finger Lakes.
Well, I grew up in Rome, New York, not that far away. I went to the University of Rochester and decided this was a great area to stay in, and actually right out of college worked for the Center for Government Research, which worked on Seneca Falls village and town issues as well as the landfill now. And then decided I really wanted to be outside. Started a landscape design company after doing economic research, and then launched a radio show on gardening, which I really love doing. Expanded that to include food and wine, and so I'm an independent broadcaster. I buy the time on WYSL 1040, which is an independent radio station, one of the few, and my sponsors are independent businesses. So SavorLife.com is the sort of the hub for those radio shows.
Now, as far as radio and the Finger Lakes, what was it that drew you to radio specifically? I always find that interesting. When you get people who are career radio people or career sort of media people, there usually is sort of something that happened at some point along the way that made them say, this is what I want to do. For you, was there a specific thing, or was it just a general interest?
I love the fact that radio is flexible enough that I can really move around and broadcast from a lot of different places, so from the Rochester Public Market or from downtown Seneca Falls. So I like the flexibility of it. I think of it as the theater of the mind, and a lot of people wonder what I look like. Someone came up to me a few days ago and said, I always thought you were a little heavier, a little older. Everyone has their own vision of what I might look like, but I love the educational aspect of radio and the way I can connect with so many parts of the community in my shows.
Now, one of the items that you are frequently involved with is the wine industry, and how that has grown, and just aggressively so, over the last couple decades. Talk to us about what it's been like watching that from the outside and seeing the benefit that it's had on the whole region.
Yeah, so I've hosted a wine show for 18 years now, I think, and the wine industry in the Finger Lakes is much, much older than that. It dates to the 1800s, but Prohibition ended most of that, and it's really only started growing with the Farm Wine Act in 1970s. And now, since I started my radio shows, a few new wineries a year at the beginning, a lot more in the last several years. The curve is going very steeply upward, even steeper with breweries, cideries, distilleries. The whole craft beverage industry is growing tremendously. But one of the things that's neat about the Finger Lakes is it's remained a family business, the wineries. There's really no corporate ownership in the Finger Lakes. Although Constellation Brands is here, they don't actually own a winery here. Although I've heard rumors that they are starting a Finger Lakes brand or doing something. And they'll inevitably buy some Finger Lakes wineries because it'll be a good investment. But it is, in spite of all this growth, it's remained a family-run place where a young couple from France can come and start a winery, Domaine Le Sueur, on Cuca Lake. They don't need millions of dollars. They don't need corporate backing. And that really, I think, makes it an exciting region to cover, because when you go in these tasting rooms, you're often there with owners or family, and I like that atmosphere. So it's grown a lot. I think it's just the beginning, though, very beginning.
Now, to that effect, when you go into a lot of these tasting rooms, when you step on a lot of these properties, you see just the scope of how much money has been invested, and you see what the footprint has become from the day of perhaps when it was less high end. It feels very high end now, and it's still growing. What does that say to you about the industry as a whole?
Well, the Finger Lakes for a long time has been a sweet wine known for sweeter wines.
Mm-hmm.
And lately, I think that trend, while those continue, those will be available probably forever. There's a lot more dry wines. There's a lot more recognition now in the wine press around the world that this isn't just a great Riesling region, but also red wines, sparkling wines, dry rosé, dessert wines. There's a lot of these categories that we can compete with the rest of the world, and it's it seems maybe high end right now.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen anything yet.
Right.
This is these are mainly vineyard owners who couldn't stay alive as a farmer unless they opened a winery.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few new outside investors coming in, some of the first outside money really. But again, this is a homegrown industry, and we are just starting to see this. Fox Run Vineyards just put up, had a local metal artist create a gate for their winery.
Mm-hmm.
You got to see this gate. It is unbelievable.
Right.
It'll be in Wine Spectator. I mean, it's stunning, and that's again just the beginning of what we'll see in the next few years.
Now, obviously, a lot of that is driven by the tourism side, but it's also driven by locals too. You're talking about families and people who work and live, and is the idea that there's a limit to it, or that it can only hit a certain peak. That is the concern there, I guess it would be, not necessarily a worry, but is that a legitimate fear, or do you think that's something where the quality and the quantity is increasing at a rate where no one really should be thinking about or worried about that at this point?
Well, any time industry is growing, tourism in general, there are times when there's not enough hotel rooms.
Mm-hmm.
There's limiting factors. With the wineries, some people think that we've maxed out what we can do, and now they're just going to eat each other alive if we have more wineries.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, I think that the wines are so good
mm-hmm.
that they are going elsewhere now, and we have the world that we can ship to and we can draw tourism from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we'll look back in 5 or 10 years, and right now we look back 5 or 10 years before now, and there were, I don't know, 50 wineries, something. We have 130 or 120 or so in the Finger Lakes right now. I wouldn't be surprised if we had 300 wineries in the next 5 or 6 years.
Now, one of the things you just mentioned that I thought was pretty interesting, if you could expand on it a little bit, it isn't just about who's coming here to have the wine, but where the wine is going. Now, we've talked about it before, but tell us a little bit about the kind of reach and impact that the Finger Lakes is having now on the rest of the world.
The main model up until this point has really been bring the tourists here, have them buy in the tasting room. There have only been a few wineries that have really gone out and tried to sell their wine in New York City and San Francisco and Boston. And actually, Herman Weimer's that winery's been awfully successful. They're on 400 wine lists in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So they don't, they still have traffic comes to the tasting room, but they're selling a lot of their wine elsewhere. And now we have forged cellars, which, if you were to go out on the street here and ask a dozen people, how many countries do you think you can find Finger Lakes wine in? A lot of them probably say, we don't export Finger Lakes wine. Are you kidding? They don't even probably realize that wines are going to Europe, and yet there's a bunch of wineries that already ship to Europe, and Forged Cellars is their wine. Their Finger Lakes wine is available in 40 countries.
Mm-hmm.
That's astounding.
Yeah.
And that's just our foot in the door. And
mm-hmm.
that's just one winery. And Paul Hobbs, when his project gets going, as they start to make wine, he can do the same thing. His wines are already in probably 80 countries.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our window into the bigger world of wine, and not just a tourism area that, and we do have 65 million people within a day's drive. That's a lot of people. But there's some of these newer models of wineries that are really making wine because it's a great place to make wine and selling it elsewhere, and not depending on their tasting rooms for their livelihood.
Mm-hmm. Now, why is it that you think, is it just a matter of its own evolution? Why do you think that it took as long as it did to get to this point where it's now being, it's sort of chief exporter going out into the world?
I don't think it's actually taken very long.
Mm-hmm.
Ford Cellars has only been around for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
4 vintages, and even before that, this is a new wine region,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the quality of the wines have gone up tremendously, and the wineries like Dr. Constantine Frank and Cuca Spring have taken their wines to competitions around the country, around the world. Sheldrake Point just won a big award in Australia. Dr. Frank and Cuca Spring have actually won Best White Wine at the San Francisco Chronicle Wine Competition, biggest one in the country.
Yeah.
4 out of 7 years, Best White Wine. Now, there's some pretty frustrated folks in California who are spending a lot of money with winemakers and equipment,
Mm-hmm.
and they're getting beat by these relatively upstart Finger Lakes wineries. Best White Wine, there's Chardonnays, lots of other wines in California. And so the quality of what's here is really good. The value is really high. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say the Finger Lakes wine is expensive. Not if you live in New York City.
Right.
So it's the quality, it's the value, and wineries are now, the New York Wine and Grape Foundation is helping them try to reach out to the world and export. So a lot of these things are coming together, but it's happening pretty quickly. And, in the last 10, 15 years, that's fast, I think.
Now, you just mentioned something that I did want to ask you about, is the push from the state. What does New York State have to do to really keep the momentum going? Because there are other places in the United States where, and we've talked about this before, where similar sort of growth is being seen. Michigan, I believe, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Just walk us through what you think, or what those in the industry actually think New York State needs to do to keep it going.
Well, they're doing some of that now. They've made a lot of changes, Governor Cuomo has, in the rules and regulations for opening craft beverage businesses in general,
Mm-hmm.
and that's had a tremendous impact. The New York State's not spending as much, as far as I understand, as some of the states like North Carolina, Virginia, Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
that they want to be where we are,
Mm-hmm.
and they're making really good wine. We don't see it in our stores, but they are making really good wine. But the biggest thing, and obviously we'll talk about these, the biggest thing New York can do is to not screw this up.
Mm-hmm.
And that means realizing that you have some of the best winemakers in the world that have moved here, and you can't industrialize Watkins Glen with gas storage and Seneca Falls, Waterloo with a mega landfill for decades to come on the same lake that has half the wineries of the region.
Mm-hmm.
Those two aren't going to match. So if Governor Cuomo wants to do both of those things,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to reach our potential, because if I'm coming from Europe, I'm not going to invest tens of millions of dollars across from the gas storage hub of the Northeast, right under the lake that I'm on. I'll go elsewhere. There's lots of places in the world to invest. We aren't the only one here.
Now, as far as the investment goes, seeing the wineries spend the millions of dollars that they are spending, it's a wake-up call, I think, to everyone broadly throughout the entire Finger Lakes. But what does it say about the industry and the people behind the industry that they're willing to put this kind of money down on Hector, New York, or Varick, or any of the number of places throughout the region that are exploding? Winery here, 300 feet down the road, another winery. I mean, it's just sort of like a checkerboard effect.
Yeah, so what I think it says is that the wineries that built this region and have been here for decades have proven to the world that you can make world-class wine here. And it wasn't just a good vintage. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
a fluky year that was warm and suddenly we could make really good wine. It wasn't just one winemaker who happens to be really great and he can make awesome wine with marginal grapes. It's a broad range of wineries winning awards and getting acclaim, and that's, I think, what convinces investors that you can bet in this region, that
Mm-hmm.
and we can do even better. And I think all the existing wineries would tell you we can make better wine than we do now. We need more investment.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the wineries that are here are not capital. They don't have a lot of capital behind them. They came from owners of vineyards and have been building as they go. We haven't had, really big investors come in and spend money to do what you need to do with vines, with trellises, with equipment. There's a lot that can improve over what we've done, and yet the existing wineries have done an amazing job, and that's what's pulling in other investors.
Now, you just alluded to something that I think is worth mentioning. It is a science. There's a lot going into, on the mental side, on the physical side, there's a lot going into these wineries to make the end product what it is. Now, we just got through and we still are in a dry spell. We're still in a drought. Sort of walk us through what you've heard from people as far as what could be some of the effects that this dry summer has on wineries, the grapevines, long term.
Well, as we were talking about before the show, some of these are latent effects that don't show up for a few years. The same with cold weather. A cold winter, or the cold night that we had last winter, which was a mild winter, but one night was like minus 18 in some parts of the Finger Lakes. It does damage to the vines, but they survive, they keep growing, but they stop flourishing and maybe eventually die, or they have to be replaced because they're just not doing well enough. And the drought, we're down like a foot of rain at one point this summer. And so if you dig down a few feet where the roots can usually go to find a reservoir of water, in some cases that's not there. And so not just vines, but trees and shrubs, lots of things may struggle for a few years if we don't get that water table back up. But it gives me more and more respect for the vineyard owners, the winery owners that work with, and our farmers in general, that work with Mother Nature, all the challenges that they have. And they're expected to produce a great crop every year no matter what Mother Nature does.
That's what I was going to say. Will that create an effect over the next few years where if the wines the crops and everything continue to tail upward and continue to get better, would that be one of those against all odds sort of situations where, the people who are making it happen are lauded for their efforts?
I wouldn't say against all odds, but yeah, against the challenges of Mother Nature. And, I think it used to be 10 or 20 years ago, maybe further, that we needed a really good vintage to make red wine, especially dry red. Now, with technology, with knowledge, with slightly warmer temperatures, dry reds are amazing in the Finger Lakes on a very consistent basis. So, I think back to things like Knapp Vineyards had a hailstorm that hung over their vineyard for 20 minutes. There wasn't a leaf or a grape left on those vines. And so those are the kinds of things that come along, and the wineries hedge their bets by growing a wide variety of grapes, and farmers hedge their bets by growing hopefully a wide range of crops. But yeah, it's just, that's what Mother Nature is. That's what you buy into when you become a farmer.
Now, you talked a minute ago about some of the threats facing the industry as a whole, facing the region as a whole. You have an app and a website that you have spearheaded, the Stinker Zone, with the landfilling machine that's happening here in Seneca Falls. Talk to us a little bit about what the Stinker Zone is and how it works.
Yeah, it's not an app yet, and the website's under construction, but people can email me reports of bad stench smells from the landfill, thestinkerzone@gmail.com, and we're accumulating those and mapping them, and then providing that data to anyone who wants to work on a map. On the screens, one that Mary Erdeline did, using the data that was sent in, 180 or so reports over the last 6 months, I guess. It covers, it's a pretty broad area beyond the landfill. About 60 square miles has been impacted on a pretty regular basis by this odor. And if we expand that landfill by 10 times, the odor's going to get bigger. It's inevitable.
Now, as far as the switching gears to the Crestwood the threat that Crestwood
The other end of
poses.
Seneca Lake.
The other end of Seneca Lake.
Yeah.
Talk to us as far as where it is, where you feel it's going, and how it's going to play out over the next few months. Obviously, we aren't fortune tellers, but being more involved in it down there as you have been, talk to us about that and how it's been going out.
I don't have a clue what's going to happen. Strange things keep going on, just like in Seneca Falls with the landfill. It's just bizarre things. So the latest is that the permit that was given to Crestwood may be invalid because there wasn't a state geologist to sign off on it, and they had a acting associate geologist sign off. And so it's a legal battle now to see whether that permit is even valid. But there's lots of legal back and forth. There's a lot of money being spent by Crestwood. By the luckily, Earth Justice and Natural Resources Defense Council have come in and provided maybe $500,000 of legal support to gas-free Seneca and to the municipalities around Seneca Lake. Mm-hmm. And that battle will probably continue for a few years. The very dedicated group has been protesting because there really was no other way to stop this. It's complicated because there are a couple different kinds of gas and a couple different regulating agencies, but one part of that Crestwood had to go ahead to do. Mm-hmm. Nothing New York State could do to stop it, and so We Are Seneca Lake has been protesting on a regular basis there. Some fairly famous celebrities have been arrested, a lot of business owners, winery owners, vineyard managers have been arrested, and that will probably continue because they want Governor Cuomo to realize that we're not going to risk Seneca Lake and our livelihoods over this harebrained idea to put massive amounts of gas in unstable salt caverns. So it's people can go to gasfreeseneca.com, to wearesenecalake.com, and kind of follow what's happening there. It's a mess, mm-hmm. And it's also a very small town. Election results are going to have a big impact. So the town of Reading, they split the vote. They had a write-in candidate who split the vote, cost the anti-gas people a seat on the town board, a crucial seat. You have that in Seneca Falls coming up. There's 2 seats up. If the two for the dump who didn't appear at the community forum, I'm not sure why, but they didn't. I don't know who they are. If they win, the dump probably stays open forever. That's my point of view.
Now, to that effect, you just mentioned the impact of local election, and you have seen, not just recently, but over the course of your entire life, how important local elections are. People tend to get wrapped up in the governor races, the Senate races, the presidential races, but really when it comes down to it, as residents of Seneca Falls, residents of Reading, residents of Finger Lakes are seeing, the local elections are way, way, way more important for them individually. What has sort of been your take as you've seen a couple decades now of sort of evolution in the wine industry and the Finger Lakes as a whole, as it relates to the elections locally?
Well, the election in Seneca Falls really impacts an entire region because Exit 41, Waterloo, is the gateway for, I've said many times, 20 million people that live in the Northeast to come visit the Finger Lakes, and they're going to have to drive by a landfill. And so this town election, which will be decided by hundreds of votes, not thousands, hundreds of votes, could be legally purchased by Seneca Meadows. I say legally because they could just ask their employees, go and recruit a few new people to register to vote. They'll probably vote with them. You don't have to tell them how to vote. Just recruit some more. And those 50 or 100 extra votes could decide the election that will impact an entire region. It goes way beyond just Seneca Falls and the impact of the dump.
Now,
big impact.
You worked for the Center for Government Research, and the CGR has been a part of the last couple Seneca Falls town meetings in terms of sharing some information. which was received sort of on a mixed bag level. Some people thought, can't really trust it. Other people thought, see, this is the proof that we were looking for. As a former employee, talk to us not just about the work they do, but the credibility of the entity itself.
Yeah, and I said this at the community forum, and luckily, we're fortunate Finger Lakes won. You can go on YouTube and watch that community forum right now,
Yep.
And go back and watch these other meetings. CGR is a very reputable company. I would trust what they produced, but with the caveat that they were hired by Seneca Meadows to answer a very narrow question. Mm-hmm. They weren't hired to look into the future and say, what's better for Seneca Falls in 10 years? Mm-hmm. That's the crucial question.
Right.
And it will be very difficult to lose the money from the landfill. I don't disagree with that at all. I think it belittles the creative people here in Seneca Falls to say that there's nothing you can do. I think there's a lot of very creative and smart people here that can help solve this. Mm-hmm. And to argue that there's nothing that can be done, this is going to be a disaster, is wrong. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be a huge challenge, but it's for our children and our grandchildren 10 years from now. Obviously Seneca Meadows didn't hire them to do that analysis because it wouldn't look good for the landfill.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we get you out of here, two remaining questions. Your feeling in terms of 5 years from now, if you were looking into a crystal ball, 5 or 10 years from now, what does the Finger Lakes look like? And then the second part of that, where can the people who are out there watching, listening, where can they hear you?
So in 5 years, I think the Finger Lakes will have grown tremendously. There'll be a lot more new investment. That investment will happen faster if Governor Cuomo says no gas storage, another place for this landfill. We can't do these two projects. If they both go on, investment will slow down. The Finger Lakes will still succeed, but we're not going to reach anywhere near our potential with these projects. So there could be 2 or 3 times as many wineries in 5 years, I think. And people can hear me on WYSL 1040 AM, like your tax form, 92.1 FM, and then savorlife.com. It streams, and also archives are there.
Very cool. I think we will definitely be having you back. There's a lot of other things to talk about, but I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for your time.
That's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Michael for stopping by and remind everyone to check him out on WYSL on the 2 stations he just told you about every single weekend. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Time Warner Cable Channel 12. And, of course, the podcast is always available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. For Michael Warren Thomas, I'm Josh Durso, reminding you to join us next week on another edition of Inside the FLX.